So you're scrolling through Instagram at 11 p.m. and your college roommate just posted pictures from their third vacation this year. This time it's the Maldives. Meanwhile, you're sitting there eating leftover pasta for the fourth night in a row because you're being responsible with money. And here's what goes through your head. Maybe I'm doing this all wrong. Maybe I should be living a little more. 3 months later, you've booked a trip you can't really afford. You're driving a car with payments that make you wince, and somehow you have less money than ever. But hey, at least your Instagram looks good, right? My name is Elon Musk, and I spend way too much time thinking about why smart people make terrible financial decisions. If you're someone who's ever made a purchase because you felt like you were falling behind everyone else, or if you've ever felt that nagging feeling that your financial progress just isn't impressive enough compared to your peers, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Because today we're talking about the most expensive emotion in personal finance, envy. And I'm not talking about the obvious stuff like don't try to keep up with the Joneses. I'm talking about the hidden, insidious ways that comparing yourself to others is costing you thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars over your lifetime. Here's the thing, financial envy isn't just about buying stuff you don't need. That's actually the smallest part of the problem. The real damage happens in 3 ways that most people never even notice. A study from the Journal of Consumer Research found that people who frequently compare their financial status to others spend 23% more annually than those who don't. 23%. If you're making $60,000 a year and spending $50,000, that's an extra $11,500 going out the door every single year because you're measuring yourself against other people. But let's do the math on what that actually costs you over time, because this is where it gets really expensive. If instead of spending that extra $11,500, you invested it at a conservative 8% annual return, in 30 years you'd have $1.4 million. Let me say that again. Your comparison habit could be costing you over $1 million in retirement savings. Now you might be thinking, okay, but I don't spend that much more just because of what other people are doing. And look, I get it. Nobody wants to admit they're that influenced by other people. But here's what most people don't realize. Financial envy operates almost entirely in your subconscious. Let me give you a concrete example. Sarah is a 32-year-old marketing manager making $75,000 a year. She considers herself pretty immune to social pressure. She doesn't buy designer handbags, she drives a practical, she's not trying to impress anyone. But here's what happened over the course of 1 year. Her mentioned getting a Peloton bike. Sarah didn't think much of it, but 3 weeks later, she's researching home fitness equipment. She doesn't buy the Peloton, that would be ridiculous, but she does buy a $800 exercise bike and a $300 adjustable dumbbell set because at least it's cheaper than a gym membership. Cost $1,100. Her sister bought a house in the suburbs. Suddenly, Sarah's perfectly nice apartment feels temporary and inadequate. She starts looking at condos. She's not ready to buy, but she does upgrade to a bigger apartment because it's good to have the space. Extra cost per year, $3,600. 3 of her friends plan a group trip to Portugal. Sarah wasn't planning on traveling internationally this year, but she doesn't want to miss out on the memories. She puts the $2,400 trip on her credit card and tells herself she'll pay it off quickly. She doesn't. Interest cost over the year, $288. Her boyfriend's sister just got engaged with a ring that was, and I quote, absolutely stunning. Now every time Sarah thinks about her relationship, there's this little voice asking when her turn will come. She doesn't buy an engagement ring, obviously, but she does start spending more on date nights and weekend trips to strengthen the relationship. Extra cost, $1,800. Here's the kicker, if you asked Sarah whether she makes financial decisions based on what other people are doing, she'd say absolutely not. But in 1 year, comparison spending that she didn't even consciously recognize cost her $6,788. And she makes good money, she's responsible, she has a 401k. This is where it gets really interesting. Your brain has this thing called relative deprivation, which is just a fancy way of saying that your happiness isn't based on what you have, it's based on what you have compared to other people. Researchers at the University of Warwick found that people would rather make $50,000 a year when everyone around them makes $40,000 than make $70,000 when everyone around them makes $80,000. Think about that. People would literally choose to be in absolute terms just to be relatively richer compared to their peers. This isn't rational, this is insane, but it's how we're wired. And social media has turned this psychological quirk into a financial crisis. A study by LinkedIn found that 61% of people feel inadequate when they compare their life and career to what they see on social media. And here's the scary part. The people who make you feel the most inadequate aren't celebrities or billionaires, they're people who are just slightly ahead of you. Your former classmate who became a doctor, your who got promoted, your friend who bought a house first. Because here's what most people don't realize. You don't compare yourself to Jeff. That's so far outside your reality that it doesn't trigger envy. You compare yourself to people in your orbit. And thanks to social media, your orbit now includes everyone you've ever known plus everyone they know. Look, the money you spend because of comparison is expensive, but it's not even the most expensive part. The most expensive part is what economists call opportunity cost, all the things you can't do because you spent that money on something else. Let me break this down with real numbers. Let's say you're 30 years old and you spend an extra $500 per month on things that are influenced by comparison. Maybe it's a nicer car, a bigger apartment, more frequent dining out, vacations you weren't planning on, clothes to maintain a certain image, whatever. Just $500 a month, which honestly doesn't sound like that much. If instead you invested that $500 per month in a low-cost index fund averaging 8% returns, by age 65, you'd have $1,118,473. Over $1 million. But here's where it gets even worse. That's not just money, that's freedom. That's the ability to retire 5 years earlier. That's the ability to take a lower-paying job you actually love. That's the ability to weather a medical emergency without panic. That's the ability to help your kids with college. That's options. Every time you make a financial decision based on comparison instead of your actual values and goals, you're trading your future freedom for present appearance. Now you might be thinking, okay, but what if I actually do want some of those things? What if I'm not just buying them because of other people? Fair question, and here's the tricky part. Once you upgrade your lifestyle for any reason, it's almost impossible to downgrade. This is called lifestyle creep, and it's the financial equivalent of a ratchet. It only moves in one direction. You move into a nicer apartment because your friend bought a house. The apartment costs more, but you tell yourself you can afford it. But now you're furnishing a bigger space, and the neighborhood is nicer, so the restaurants are more expensive. And everyone in your new building has nicer cars, so suddenly your 10-year-old feels embarrassing in the parking garage. And maybe you start thinking about getting a dog because you finally have space, and a dog costs $1,500 per year on average. One upgrade triggers 5 more, and each one feels justified in isolation, but together they've locked you into a spending pattern that requires every dollar you make plus a little bit more. A study by the Federal Reserve found that 40% of Americans couldn't cover a $400 emergency expense with cash. 40%. These aren't all people making minimum wage. Many of them have good incomes. They just have lifestyles that consume every penny. Here's something that nobody talks about. Comparison spending isn't just about wanting stuff. It's about identity. You're not buying the luxury car. You're buying the identity of someone who drives a luxury car. You're not booking the expensive vacation. You're buying the identity of someone who travels to exotic places. You're not getting the designer watch. You're buying the identity of someone who has made it. And this is expensive for a completely different reason. Because once you tie your identity to your spending, any attempt to cut back feels like a personal failure. It feels like you're moving backwards. It feels like admitting you were wrong. I've seen people refuse to downsize their apartment even when they're drowning in debt because, what would people think? I've seen people lease cars they can't afford because their self-image requires it. I've seen people take vacations on credit cards because not traveling feels like admitting you're not successful. Your ego is the most expensive thing you own. Let me show you something that changed how I think about every single purchase. Let's say you're considering buying something that costs $5,000. Maybe it's a vacation, maybe it's furniture, maybe it's a fancy watch, doesn't matter. Here's what you need to ask yourself, what is this really costing me? If you're 30 years old and you invest that $5,000 instead at 8% returns, by age 65, it becomes $68,485. So that $5,000 purchase doesn't cost $5,000. It costs $68,485 in future money. Now sometimes that's worth it. If it's your wedding or your kid's education or something that genuinely adds massive value to your life, maybe $68,485 in retirement money is a fair trade. But if you're buying it because your friend has one, or because you feel like you should have it by now, or because it'll look good on Instagram, is it worth $68,485? Here's another way to think about it. The rule of 25 says you need 25 times your annual spending saved to retire. So if you want to retire on $60,000 per year, you need $1.5 million saved. But every $1,000 increase in your annual spending means you need to save an additional $25,000 for retirement. So when you upgrade to a nicer car with payments that are $200 more per month, you're not just committing to paying $2,400 more per year. You're also requiring an additional $60,000 in retirement savings. That $200 per month car upgrade just made your retirement $60,000 more expensive. Nobody thinks about it this way, but this is the math. Okay, so we've established that financial envy is incredibly expensive, but here's what you actually need to hear. The solution isn't to stop caring what people think. That's impossible. We're social creatures. The solution is to change whose opinion you care about. Right now, you probably care about the opinions of people who are 1 or 2 steps ahead of you financially. The person with the bigger house, the nicer car, the better vacation. And their approval feels important because it signals that you're succeeding, that you're moving up, that you're not falling behind. But here's what most people don't realize. Those people are playing a game that never ends. There's always someone with a bigger house, a nicer car, a better vacation. You can't win by comparison because the target keeps moving. So here's the shift. Start caring about the opinion of your future self. Your future self, the one who's 60 years old and wondering if they have enough to retire, or the one who's 45 and stuck in a job they hate because they need the paycheck. That person has opinions about what you're doing right now. And those opinions actually matter. Every time you're about to make a purchase because of comparison, ask yourself, would my future self thank me for this, or would they wish I'd saved the money? Here's something that sounds backwards but is absolutely true. The less you care about looking wealthy, the more likely you are to actually become wealthy. Thomas Stanley wrote this book called The Millionaire Next Door, where he studied actual millionaires, not celebrities, not inheritors, but regular people who built wealth. And you know what he found? Most of them don't look like millionaires. They drive modest cars, live in middle-class neighborhoods, buy their clothes at department stores, and don't take expensive vacations. Meanwhile, the people who look wealthy, the ones with the luxury cars and designer clothes and impressive lifestyles, most of them are broke. They're living paycheck to paycheck with a side of credit card debt. Wealth is what you don't see. It's the investments, the savings accounts, the paid-off house, the options. Looking wealthy and being wealthy are almost opposites. There's this quote from Morgan Housel: spending money to show people how much money you have is the fastest way to have less money. And it's true, but it goes deeper than that. Every dollar you spend on appearance is a dollar you can't spend on freedom. All right, so what do you actually do about this? Because understanding the problem is step 1, but you need concrete actions. First, do a comparison audit. For the next 30 days, every time you make a discretionary purchase over $50, write down the purchase and honestly ask yourself, would I have bought this if no one ever knew about it? If the answer is no, or even maybe, you're comparison shopping. Just the act of tracking this will cut your comparison spending by at least 30%. Second, calculate your freedom number. Take your annual spending and multiply it by 25. That's roughly how much you need invested to retire. Then calculate how much you're saving each year and figure out how many years until you hit that number at reasonable investment returns. That's your current trajectory to freedom. Now ask yourself, is whatever you're buying worth delaying that freedom? Third, curate your inputs. Unfollow or mute people on social media who make you feel inadequate. This isn't about them being bad people, it's about protecting your psychology. If someone's posts consistently trigger comparison thoughts, you need to remove that trigger. Your financial future is more important than seeing their vacation photos. Fourth, find your enough. This is the big one. You need to define what enough looks like for you, independent of what anyone else has. What does a good life actually require? What would make you genuinely happy versus what would impress other people? Write it down, get specific. Because if you don't define enough, you'll chase more forever. Fifth, automate your savings before you can spend. Set up automatic transfers to your investment accounts on payday. If the money never hits your checking account, you can't spend it on comparison purchases. Pay your future self first. Look, here's the thing that nobody wants to hear. You're going to die. I'm going to die. Everyone watching this is going to die. And when you're 85 years old, you know what you're not going to think about. You're not going to think about how impressed people were by your car in 2026. You're not going to think about how good your Instagram looked. You're not going to think about whether you kept up with You're going to think about whether you had freedom, whether you had choices, whether you were trapped by financial decisions you made when you were young because you cared too much about appearances. Financial envy is expensive, but it's not expensive because of the money. It's expensive because it steals your freedom. It steals your options. It steals years of your life that you could have spent doing what you actually want instead of working to pay for things you bought to impress people you don't even like. The good news is that you can stop today, right now. You can decide that you're done playing the comparison game. You can decide that your future freedom matters more than your present appearance. You can decide to be the person who gets wealthy quietly while everyone else stays broke loudly. So here's your homework. Calculate how much money you've spent in the last 6 months on things that were influenced by comparison. Be honest. Then calculate what that money would be worth in 30 years if you'd invested it. Look at that number. Really look at it. That's what your envy costs. And then decide if it's worth it. If this video opened your eyes to how much comparison spending is costing you, smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss future videos. Drop a comment and let me know, what's the biggest comparison purchase you've ever made that you now regret? Your future self is watching. Make them proud.